and I'm going to move on to introduce our next speaker. Alan Millar is a native of Donegal, now living in Ballymoney. He's a journalist, poet and story writer. He was actually nominated for Scots Writer of the Year 2023, and he's a volume of poetry just come out in May. What's it called?
Eggs from the Big Swally Swally.
That's what it's called. Alan's title in the programme is a wee bit different from the talk that I got. The title of the programme is Head Schools in Ulster and Beyond, but the actual title I got was quite poetic, which was Book Clubs, Bards and Communitarian Education in Late 18th Century East Antrim. So I'll hand you over to Alan. Alan, away you go.
Thank you, James. Book Clubs, Bards and Communitarian Education in Late 18th Century East Antrim. Writing for the Ulster Journal of Archaeology in 1902 in an article about the Four Towns Book Club in Craigaragan near Mollusk, the antiquarian Francis Joseph Bigger said, "The awakening of men's minds by the French Revolution and the stirring political events of that period had much to do with this interest in self-education 100 years ago. In fact, the thirst for self-improvement among the agricultural and labouring classes predates this period, with education for both adults and children already well documented in the strongly Presbyterian areas of 6 Mile Valley of East Antrim several decades before. The influence of St Field's famed Francis Hutchinson, Chair of Moral Philosophy at Glasgow University from 1729 to 1746, was filtering out into the dissenting flocks of Ulster through the mouths of the many ministers he helped educate from the 1730s. What is now called Enlightenment thinking gained political power in the run-up to and during the American Revolutionary period. This invigorated the polemical discourse in Ulster. Empathy with the American colonies was strong due to family ties and their cause easily linkable to conditions at home. The campaign for reform of the terminally corrupt Irish Parliament renewed. Multiple sources in East Antrim corroborate the fact that children born during this period grew up in a community that nurtured learning. It is no coincidence that this was a generation who would later drive forward the United Irishman political and subsequently revolutionary project. United Irish Revolutionary and Ulster Scots weaver poet James Orr of Ballycarry, born 1770, was, according to his biographer MacDowell, educated at home by his father. The biography also states that schooling was available in his village. Northern Star poetic contributor and Temple Patrick schoolmaster Samuel Thompson, born in 1766, was undoubtedly another product of this culture, though nothing is known of his childhood. But the fact that he was teaching his own school at Cairngranny by the late 1780s, while still in his early 20s, speaks for itself. I will do a brief sketch of his life later in the talk. Famed revolutionary weaver James Hope, born nearby in 1764 at Rufford near Temple Patrick, had no less than 3 farmers he worked for as a child, helping him with his education. His memoir states that he started work in 1774, aged 10, with just 15 weeks of schooling under his belt. William Bell of Temple Patrick, the memoir states, took every opportunity of improving my mind. Bell read classic history and the histories of England, Ireland and Scotland to him. The father of his next employer, John Gibson, also of Temple Patrick, started teaching him to read and write, with a third farmer, John Ritchie, also helping him with his writing. In the age of immense inequalities and grotesque exploitation of the poor, with Catholics across Ireland still living under the yoke of the penal legislation, the power of communitarian ethos driving those 3 farmers to help a labouring boy, in all likelihood no kin of their own, paints an uplifting picture. One in stark contrast to that oft-cited tragedy today, the poor academic performance of working-class Protestant males. Hope's experience was not an isolated one. During Hope's childhood, local initiatives building educational capacity for both adults and children were on the increase. Just a few miles away at Doak, William Galt had founded the first Sunday school in Ireland in 1770. The source for this detail etched proudly on his headstone at Kilbride. To declare this in the brevity offered by the headstone again speaks for itself. In 1768, 2 years earlier, a book club had been founded. They acquired a building around 1780 and used the ground floor as a schoolroom. Over the next 25 years, the library upstairs would grow to be the largest library in rural Ulster. It contained around 1,500 volumes by the time it was ransacked in 1798 by the Carrickfergus Fencibles. The building remains in use today as a community facility to this day. By the 1790s, Doch Reading Room's reputation had extended beyond the district. Grey Abbey minister Dr. James Porter, hanged outside his church during the rebellion, had included Doch on the circuit of venues for his lectures on natural philosophy. In November 1795, in an extract from a letter from the Giant's Causeway appeared in the Northern Star, the writer, detained in Doch because of the weather, said, "Whilst Europe is in convulsion and our native country exhibiting scenes of lawless depredation, there are here very differently employed. They have a Sunday school of above 9 years standing, where above 100 children attend and receive instructions, not from any stated master, but from members of a book club who cheerfully and laudably attend in rotation, 6 or 7 at a time." He added, "'Tis astonishing what industry, sober manners, and a thirst for knowledge will effect. They have an excellent library," he added, "but what chiefly excited my astonishment and heightened my pleasure was the talk given on the principles of geography by Dr. Porter to 200 people." Shortly after, in December, an advertisement appeared in the Northern Star, indicated that as well as lectures in natural philosophy, Dr. Porter also offered a morning class for the benefit of young ladies who are desirous of acquiring a knowledge of the first principles of astronomy, geography, and the use of globes. It wasn't just boys who were benefiting from an education. Figures from slightly later, in 1824, in Ballymoney, indicated that 1,263 pupils in the parish were being educated, 696 boys and 567 girls. You recall that the Northern Star letter writer records Doch Book Club were doing the teaching. Perhaps they were between schoolmasters when he visited, for applicants for this position of schoolmaster were invited in an advert in the newsletter in April 1791. Someone to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and if he could teach languages, it would be an additional recommendation. In February 1796, a schoolmaster wanted ad appears in the Northern Star to teach at Doch. It's necessary that he be a good English scholar, writes in a good hand, and understands arithmetic perfectly, and his character must be impeccable. Application may be made to Samuel Neilson Belfast or William Galt Doch. John Hewitt suggests in his book Rhyming Weavers that the quality of teachers often wasn't high. Discussing the aforementioned Samuel Thompson of nearby Cairngranny, he says, "Thompson is altogether of a more literary cast of mind than many of the other schoolmasters of Antrim or Down who were his contemporaries." In Ballynure, a few miles away, Reverend Adam Hill also ran a school. His advert appears in the Star in October 1794, informing the public that his Ballynure Grammar School would open again on November the 12th. The ad read, "Youth instructed to his care will be instructed in Latin and Greek languages, English grammar, and elements of geography. If required, vacations will not amount to more than 3 weeks a year, terms as usual, 11 shilling and 4pence. Interestingly, Reverend Hill, product of the Enlightenment thinking that he was, seemed to be providing a secular education with no religious studies mentioned, but his quarterly fees would have been far beyond the labouring families whose wages often did not amount to more than a shilling a day. Though communitarian educational provision crossing classes and stations of people was available, if fees were too costly, home education remained key for the poor person. Samuel Walker of Shane's Hill, just a few townlands away from Thompson, left to posterity a handwritten manuscript of poetry composed in the early 1800s. One verse describes labouring class parents keeping an attentive eye on their children as their studies before church on Sunday. At their studies before church on Sunday. The young uns to their tasks attend in Bible, question, book or ABC. The parents view with an attentive eye, with heartfelt joy, what now employs the wains. What of hard work or curious task they see, they at their sire inquire, aye, what it means, while he as wills he can, their questions explains. The sketch of a country schoolmaster, Samuel Thompson of Cairngranny. In her essay, Constructing the Ulster Labouring Class Poet, the case of Samuel Thompson, Dr. Jennifer Orr says, he was positioned slightly above his labouring peers as one of the most intellectual men in the neighbourhood, who had the added responsibility of educating the sons of labourers who showed promise, affording them some degree of upward mobility. Samuel Thompson, 1766 to 1816, described by some as the bard in residence at the Northern Star, taught school from the late 1780s at his modest two-roomed cottage at Cairngranny, just off the coach road connecting Cairnmoney to Antrim. Thompson doesn't often refer to his day job, but some excerpts from the Reverend Robert Park's 1824 account of schools in Ballymoney perhaps offer a glimpse. The teacher at Ballygavin, James Riddles, Reverend Park says, was 20 years of age, of excellent moral character, qualified to teach writing, arithmetic and English grammar. The teacher at Forttown, Thomas Quigg, was described as a Presbyterian, requested to take charge of the school upon trial, confirmed by committee about 2.5 years hence. And the schoolhouse at Forttown, Park continues, is built of stone and mortar, roof thatched, contains the schoolroom, 14 foot square, one large writing desk and form, tables, seats that might accommodate 50 children. So I think those pictures may give an idea of what Thompson's schoolroom would have been like. What school boots might Thompson have used? Renowned Belfast educator David Manson died in March 1792, a month before Thompson started his career of publishing at the Northern Star. Perhaps he was one of the multitudes attending Manson's torchlit funeral. He, in all likelihood, used Manson's spelling book, dictionary and prime, and Goth's arithmetic. Thompson again tells us very little, but like Reverend Park, James Orr's poem Elegy, written in the ruins of a country school, mentions both Manson and Goth. And here we met the starving keen to stray, with slate in hand and turf beneath his arm. Every pupil had to bring their own bit of turf for the fire, indicating what a modest affair it was. Orr continues, my rude covals learned to read and write, concluded Goth, and went their bread to gain. So they got the very basic education and then had to go out to work. Our tasks, he says, were bounded by the Catechism, the Youth's Companion, the Holy Word, ere Manson's vain improvements rent a schism, an ancient system soon to be restored. I haven't actually researched those lines overly, but it seems to me that Manson's progressive views were rolled back after his death to more traditional systems. Interesting verse suggesting that this little enlightened window that opened up in the late 18th century was closed again, the old systems of education restored. Letters written to Thompson by Belfast bookseller Robert Calwell suggests that Thompson was selling on copies of Bell, which Orr suggests may be educational specialist Dr. John Bell, who pioneered the Madras system of education, where brighter children tutor the weaker ones. If so, Thompson was familiar with this cutting-edge material. Thompson's frustration with weaker pupils is exasperated in a poem to a blockhead at school in his 1799 edition of poems, where he advises the proverbial blockhead, quit books altogether and strike up with labour. Shake hands with a shovel, a dunghill you'll find, a subject congenial at once to your mind. Or perhaps not frustration, just the articulation of the grim reality. At least a shovel could earn a person a living. In 1806, a letter to Thompson from David Boyd at Belfast Workhouse suggests that Thompson had been asking about his teaching methods in the workhouse and had asked Boyd to give him a copy of Telfair's Key to Gough. Telfair's Key to Gough's Arithmetic, written by John Gow mentioned earlier. There were very obvious limits to the quality of education Thompson could provide. 2 entries in the Northern Star perhaps shedding light on this. On June 22, 1793, Miss McNeely from Cairngranny is listed to have having a premium adjudged in her writing exams at Mr. Ware's boarding school in Belfast. On October 1794, it was noted that John McNeely of Cairngranny got a silver medal from Mr. Telfair's class for exemplary conduct and reading. These are probably the children of Thompson's good friend and next door neighbour John McNeely. The McNeelys were decent sized farmers rather than gentry. That Sam had some advising hand in how his friend could have his children best schooled, and even facilitating that through his connections in Belfast, is an easy imaginative step to take. The wooden floored schoolrooms of burgeoning bourgeois Belfast, a far cry from the clay floor and rickety forms and stools of his own drafty schoolroom. In 1811, 5 years before Thompson died, an Erasmus Smith's School opened in Craigarigan, just a few fields away from Cairngranny. By this time, Thompson was in declining health and spirits. The rest of Ireland. The situation in East Antrim was quite different from most of the rest of Ireland. Up until the 1790s, Irish was the first language over most of the country, including practically all of Connacht and Ulster. It remained the common medium of teaching even after the enactment of the penal laws put severe restrictions on Catholic education. But the head schools that grew up after the collapse of the old Gaelic order were due to oppression. But a faint ember of the bardic schools that previously taught literature, history and Brehon law. Laurie O'Higgins, in her paper Scholarship of the 18th Century Irish Poor, says, Irish poets devolved into teachers and compilers of manuscripts as the system collapsed around them. Writing in 1808, James Egan of Killarney, defending the Catholics of Ireland from certain vulgar opinions, said, At this moment 40 children attend my classes, born to the poorest farmers, of whom a large number display such talent and industry that they might have filled any role in life. For it is certain that God did not grant talent only to the rich. In my classroom you might hear the spirit of Caesar or Cicero beneath the garb of a peasant. These sentiments could just as easily have been expressed in East Antrim, though at the opposite ends of the country, with differing circumstances, a thirst for learning shared by all, which at its height had often... conclusion. Thompson was a member and probably a founder member of the Four Towns Book Club. Biggar states that it was formed in 1802 from an amalgamation of Lowtown, formed 1790, and Rufford, formed 1796. They had a reading room not far from Craigarigan Fort, which at its height had over 400 volumes in the library. James Orr's poem The Reading Society paints an atmospheric picture of labouring men making their way from farm and workshop to attend the reading circle to sensibly converse away their care. That book clubs were tangible manifestations of the communitarian thirst for education and knowledge also meant that they were a mirror through which the decline of that thirst could be viewed. The complete Francis Biggar quote that I mentioned at the start from his Ulster Journal of Archaeology reads as follows. The decay in these book clubs throughout the country shows a decided falling off in the interest taken in literature. The grandfathers of present race were students of every new book that appeared, and read with avidity the magazines and poems as they appeared, many of them dabbling in the art of writing. Now all is changed. Better houses, better food, freer education prevail, but the love for books and their authors is gone, leaving not a trace behind that I have seen. And I know many men who can scarce write and could never read, whose grandfathers lived in comparative culture. The awakening of men's minds by the French Revolution and the stirring political events of that period had much to do with the self-education 100 years ago. But how to account for its decadence at the present time under what appears to be a more advantageous circumstances, it's hard to explain. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again to Alan for really in-depth research and insight into a past that is inspirational, a lot more inspirational than our present.